Candi Borobudur, the largest Buddhist temple in the world, is situated in central Java, about 40 kilometers northwest of Yogyakarta. Construction by the Buddhist Shailendra dynasty began around 780 and was completed under the Hindu Sanjaya dynasty over 50 years later. By around the 15th century of the Common Era, this massive temple was largely abandoned as the local population converted to Islam. When Stamford Raffles came to Semarang in 1814 as the Governor-General of Java, Borobudur had been completely overgrown and surrounded by tropical forest. After its restoration by successive Dutch and Indonesian governments, and with substantial help from international bodies such as UNESCO and several European nations, it has become a popular tourist site, the most visited monument in Indonesia, according to Wikipedia. My purpose in this video is not to market Borobudur, but rather to inquire as to how modern-day Muslims, either in Indonesia or elsewhere, should regard this giant stone puzzle. Should they visit it, admire it, promote it, help restore it, or ignore it and even discourage Muslims from wanting to see it? There are arguments to be made on both sides, and I do not expect to resolve them in one brief video. I would like my viewers to at least realize that issues like this are complex, and that Muslims can be legitimately open-minded and tolerant about their differences on complex issues. We are, moreover, ummata wasata, and extremes of violent rejection, such as occurred in a 1985 bombing that damaged parts of the temple, and slavish acceptance, quite common in Indonesia today, are both unbefitting mature Muslim minds. We should begin where all proper Islamic inquiries begin, with Allah. When work on Borobudur began in the 8th century of the Common Era, Islam was already extant in Arabia, North Africa, and Iran, and was expanding eastwards. But the message of Muhammad ﷺ had probably not yet reached the interior of Java, and the local nobles, craftsmen, and villagers who toiled mightily to erect this monument to their faith would have known nothing or next to nothing about Islam. Could they be excused for their ignorance? Or were they guilty of having abandoned their original covenant with Allah when He brought their spirits out before their descent to earth and asked them, Alastu bi Rabbikum? At this point, I recommend you acquire my book, Ideas Inspired by the Qur'an, and read chapter 31, where I discuss the issue of what guidance can be possible for people who have not received the message of Islam. This too is a delicate and complex issue, clouded with mystery, insofar as only God knows what their intentions were and what His judgment of them will be. We can safely say, however, that this building was felt to be the highest and best thing that the Javanese of that time had ever seen or made. Every part of their lives was immersed in shirk, animism, polytheism, and the symbolic or literal worship of statues. Considering the narrow ambit of their daily lives, Borobudur was either, in God's view, the best or the worst thing they could have done. On the one hand, it was a grand celebration of what they conceived to be salvation and truth. Nothing else in their lives could be as profound and majestic. On the other hand, it cast in stone what may well be the most unforgivable mistake a human on earth can make, to produce images and venerate them instead of God. Allah permitted this structure to be made. He has preserved it by great human effort and expense until today, and still He certainly condemns it as a monument to shirk. But then, Java was blessed a few centuries after the temple's erection by His guiding the descendants of those original builders to Islam, by covering the temple in dense jungle, and by causing them to almost forget that it was even there. The Muslims of 15th century Java had no need to reject Borobudur. It had disappeared from their mental and spiritual horizon under God's thick vegetation. The Europeans brought it back. This rediscovery of ancient history, first in Europe, then all over the world, coincided with the so-called Enlightenment, identifying materialism with light and faith with darkness. And then with Romanticism, when authentic emotion, myths, fables, heroes, and nationalistic narratives took off and became dominant. Borobudur, like the Parthenon, the pyramids, Persepolis, and Angkor Wat, represented another example of this passion for the past. The locals, so it seemed, had no love or respect for their history. The Europeans had to come in and show them how great their ancestors were. In the Qur'an, on the other hand, we read, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمُ اتَّبِعُوا مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ قَالُوا بَلْ نَتَّبِعُ مَا أَلْفَيْنَا عَلَيْهِ آبَاءَنَا أَوَلَوْ كَانَ آبَاؤُهُمْ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ. A serious Muslim could argue that Allah wants us to visit places like Borobudur based on verses like these. أَفَلَمْ يَسِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَيَنْظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ, or سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ ثُمَّ انْظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ. I suppose that a Muslim could spend thousands of dollars visiting the ruins of ancient temples and palaces, such as in Rome or Bali or Prambanan, also near Yogyakarta, and practice shaking his head and sighing with pity and Islamic hauteur over every broken down shrine or colosseum. But the guidebooks and plaques along the outdoor walkways and in the museums do not try to show us how pitiful our ancestors were so that we might turn our attention back to God. Rather, they are there to make us admire what humanity was doing in the past, to make us feel that it was somehow worthwhile to spend those huge sums on the planes and buses that took us there and the tickets we had to buy to go in and look. By preserving and promoting these ancient sites, it can be argued, we are protecting a kind of evidence that broadens the mind, enlarges the heart, and helps us escape the pathetic, childish concerns for money and power that characterize our so-called leaders of today. We can see how people in the past lived, believed, and had aspirations similar to ours. By witnessing history in this form, we become more sensitive to both the differences and the similarities that have always marked humanity, and thus see ourselves for who we are by the grace of God, or could have been. I agree that Muslims should be educated, well-informed, aware of other nations and their values and histories, and curious to know more about what life was like in other times and places. The better we understand people, the more easily and convincingly we can communicate or sympathize with them and thus improve our humility, compassion, and wisdom. I wonder, though, how many of us would visit Borobudur with those goals in mind? The main argument in favor of Borobudur is the one that today's academics, humanists, nationalists, and tourist industry officials always imply, but rarely express, that it represents a nebulous glory that somehow reflects well on the Javanese or Indonesians of today. This glory can be translated into careers for authors of scholarly books and papers, for archaeologists, for experts in Southeast Asian art, for specialists in arcane construction techniques and materials, for operators of tour companies and their employees, and for countless local vendors and business owners. Sites like Borobudur serve the myth of cultural superiority that politicians are expected to keep telling in the cause of national strength and unity. By promoting Borobudur, they might say, we are recovering and upholding the pride in one's culture that every people should have, and that the Javanese and Indonesians need in a world infatuated with Western values. But is that an Islamic goal? Are we serving Allah by visiting and admiring something that ignores, if not defies, the basic principles of Islamic culture? Are we supposed to expand Islam so far that we can embrace Borobudur and make it surreptitiously and awkwardly ours? Or do we interpret Islam so narrowly that we refuse to accept other people's notions of truth and beauty and national identity? When we resist Western values, what are we adopting to replace them? Perhaps our question should be, can our Islamic identity coexist with contradictory cultures and values, neither admitting them out of weakness nor attacking them out of ignorance and fear? Is there a middle way, and if so, what are its principles? I believe there is, but one short video is certainly not enough to reveal what those principles might be. In the meantime, while we rely on Allah for all good guidance, we must continue exploring, thinking, and praying. The gifts of God are too great to count and should occupy us more than any greatness on this planet.